Greetings folks, here's the FlightPoint Maverick 1.5 meter F5K or sloper, thermal or sloper motor glider. I have set it up in the sloper configuration, which means there's no extra angle on the outer wingtips there, and I don't have a motor on the front. With the motor and the extra angle, it is eligible for F5K competitions, I guess, entry level, balsa, as opposed to the $1,000 composite carbon fibre F5K models. So this was sent to me by Jean from FlightPoint. So I maidened it yesterday and it flew absolutely beautifully. It was in 10 knots of wind, which is probably a little bit more wind than it is best at, I suppose. Made landings a little bit scary, but I think it would really excel in lighter winds than that. Really nice coastal dunes on a nice sunny day in sort of like 6-7 knots, something like that. It would be an absolute delight. It has, it's full house, so it has enormous flaps, 6 servos. I'm using TGY D56MG servos. For the Maiden, I actually had an ESC in there. And a 2S LiPo, but Jean pointed out to me that these servos, of course, can handle 7.4 volts from 2S, so there's no need for the BEC. You can just plug the LiPo straight into the receiver. So from now on, that's what I will do. Saves a bit of weight. I think my flying weight was 360 grams. I've got a little bit of extra lead in the nose there to get the CG right. I think my CG was a little bit too far forward because I was going nose down a fair bit, so I can even get rid of some of that weight, I think. It's quite a big build, but very enjoyable with the wonderful plans that I'm sitting on here. Wonderful big colour plans. And there's almost 80 ribs, I think, there, but they all just thread onto the spars very easily. You lay them down onto the plan. The ribs have little tabs underneath them to hold them in exactly the right angle, so it's all actually quite easy to build on top of the plan. The tricky bits, the covering, well, covering's not too bad really. You just have to launch into it and give it a go. But if you've never done it before, then it is a bit daunting. You just have to sort of practice on some scrap bolts or something like that, but it kind of just works really well. Use an iron on medium heat. You sort of need to test the actual heat that you'll need so that you don't overheat the film or underheat so that it doesn't stick. But this is ProFilm transparent yellow, and I think it looks fantastic. The laser cut kit is pretty amazing, very, very accurate. There were 1 or 2 components that needed a little bit of fitting, a little bit of sanding down. One of these in the tail was the wrong shape, but hit with a sandpaper, and that is absolutely fine. I found passing the servo wires through the wing round about here, you needed to file out the hole that the servo connector glues into. Of course, the outer wing tips are just pull off, pull on, and they have a servo connector glued into the 2 ribs there, so that you can just break it down. I don't really need to break it down, so I found when I landed a couple of times the wing pulled apart just enough to disconnect the aileron servo, so I may even tape them on permanently or glue them together, not too sure. But all the tail surfaces are designed to be taken off easily, just bolting on. These really nice spring pull operation of the elevator and rudder. I really like spring pull for lightweight builds. It works very well, simple to set up, and it's just kind of funky. It's a very low drag model, of course, being a thermal glider, so on the slope in 10 knots it was quite fast, but the big flaps allowed for aggressive crow braking to plop it down onto the ground. I think eventually, I'm sure you'll be able to fly it into your hand and just catch it to stop it even touching the grass, which would be great. There were a few tricky bits. I found threading the cable for the spring pull through the fuselage. It's okay down to about here. There's a bulkhead about here with some holes in it, and of course you have to thread the cable from behind through the holes with no real access other than bending it into a C and trying to hook it around. Both my wife and I spent ages trying to do that, and we just couldn't do it. So I think it would be a good idea to thread that wire through, or thread a leader line through before you glued the bottom or the top on. Just leave it there in the fuselage. What I did eventually was just not go through the holes. There's a sort of a gap in the middle of the bulkhead that the wires can pass through. And then there's another bulkhead up the front here that you can pass the wires through the little holes quite easily. So that's no drama. The trickiest bit of all is sanding down these trailing edge and the leading edge of the flaps and ailerons and the wing there. They have to be sanded down quite a lot to get thin enough to flow on from the ribs. It would probably be a good idea to sand or shave them down before you put it together, maybe just a little bit, so you don't have to do so much sanding. I found I was being a bit clumsy, and I kept cracking ribs because you're sort of having to brace this delicate structure while you're hitting the trailing edge with sanding paper. And there's quite a lot of sanding to do with that. Or sanding the fuselage wasn't too bad, but yeah, sanding down these members here was quite tricky, and I did a little bit of damage when I was doing that, so I kept having to repair ribs. The servo arms are fully internal in the wing here, so it reduces drag to the absolute minimum. I think you get the option for having the servo arms poking out the bottom here, and I think if you're doing a sloper, it would be better to have the servo arms coming out the bottom. Say you've got the possibility of having bigger throws for your ailerons, sorry, these ones here, with the servo arms sort of cut down to minimum size so that they fit inside. It means that you don't have enormous throws on the ailerons, which is fine for sort of thermal flying, but for the slope you probably want a little bit more radical control, so you can throw loops and rolls and a bit more aerobatics like that. So if I was doing another one, I would definitely have the aileron servo arms coming out the bottom there instead of fully enclosed in there. For the hinges, I used CA hinges, or they're sort of like little bits of hairy plastic that you cut a slot in either side of the hinge, poke it in either side, flex the hinge line, and then just drop a couple of drops of CA glue in there, and it wicks into the balsa to glue them in. And I've also got a bit of Blenderm on the end bits there, just in case the CA hinges weren't strong enough, but I think they're going to be fine. And I've got about 4 of them going along there. I really like this design with the thin carbon fibre spar for the leading edge and trailing edge. It means that you can get this really fine airfoil and lots of these half ribs here to sort of hold the airfoil shape. It was kind of challenging, but I learned a lot of the techniques needed for building nice balsa planes, which I will use in the future, I'm sure. Oh, my nose cone is a TPU printed nose cone. I can easily pull that out and pop a motor in if I wanted to use it as a thermal glider in the future, but my site here is much more slope oriented rather than thermal, so I'll probably keep it as a nice lightweight sloper. Mostly use CA glue, pinning the components down onto the plans and then just dabbing with CA glue as it's set, as it's held there. Servos, I strengthened the balsa base with a bit of CA, then put a dab of CA on the servo, stuck them down, and then I put a little bit of a fillet of 5-minute epoxy around there to hold them in. The control horns are all epoxied in. So I'm very impressed with this kit. All the pieces are beautifully accurately cut. All the spars are in there, the control horns. You have to get your own covering and servos and receiver, of course, but the rest of it is all included in the kit. Very nice kit from FlightPoint, the Maverick 1.5 F5K glider sloper, a real beauty. Very, very nice kit, and I'm very happy about the way it came out. Thanks for watching.